Welcome to Waterside Chat. Tom Sadler talks with guests who depend on healthy oceans and fisheries for their recreation and livelihoods. And now, let's get started.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to today's Waterside Chat. I'm Tom Sadler, the Deputy Director of the Marine Fish Conservation Network, and your host today. I am delighted to welcome Brad Warren, who's the President of Global Ocean Health. Brad and I are going to be talking about the work they do with tribal partners to address climate change and how ocean carbon sequestration is a crucial element in addressing the massive pollution cleanup effort facing our planet. Welcome, Brad. Glad to have you aboard.
Thank you, Tom. Glad to be aboard.
Well, let's dive right into it. To sort of set the stage here, Brad, let's start with talking about you and Global Ocean Health. So give us the Brad Warren backstory, will you? Give us, where were you born? Where were you raised? Where did you learn to do what you do?
Sure, yeah. Well, I grew up in a family that used to fish, and the damming of the Columbia River put an end to the races of salmon that my grandparents knew and their brothers and sisters. And that left them, when I was coming up, in a state of just unspeakable rage and grief. What had happened to the salmon and to their life. I mean, they had built their world around it. They weren't commercial fishers. They were more like subsistence. This was where food came from during the Depression. This is how they fed the neighbors and themselves. They built their house with a canning kitchen and a room like a below ground cooler room for keeping canned salmon and canned beans. They grew their own food a lot. They were make and catch your own food people, and the destruction of the salmon for them it was basically a story about dams, and it led to experiences when I was a kid. I would say, "Hey, I see in the news that there's salmon running. Let's go catch some." And they would just sit in their armchairs and sort of fall back and breathe hard and try not to curse. I mean, the salmon that I knew in my life and still know are a shadow of the fish they knew. In the world that they tuned themselves to, built their lives around, fish were swimming up the Columbia that were, 80, 100 pounds.
Wow.
They called them channel hogs, some of them.
Channel hogs.
Yeah, they took the ship canal, the dredged deep water in the center of the river. And
wow.
So for people of that generation, the loss was unspeakable. And for me, and I think many other people of later generations, that loss motivated a lift. For them, it was defeat. For me, and I think for many others, it was a signal to get busy putting Humpty Dumpty back together again. We broke this ecosystem, and not just with dams, but with many things. And it's on us to restore it and to protect what can be protected. And for me, it started with the salmon. And that led to a determination that I was going to learn everything I could about this and figure out how do you make a difference. It led to going in very young, going into journalism. Because
Really?
It was an infinite license to ask stupid questions until I wanted something, many people who mentored me along the way made this whole thing possible. But early on, among the key mentors and the door openers was Billy Frank Jr., the sort of leader of the Northwest Indian Fisheries Commission. And Billy opened the door to folks in Indian country who were doing the most of anyone to put back together this broken system and protect and restore these salmon runs. And it became a multi-decadal relationship with them. And that's key to what we do, along with working with fishermen across the country and around the world, growers in some cases, particularly shellfish growers. If you want to define what the word frontline community, that term, what it really
Uh-huh.
means, fisheries and other sort of frontline food producers are truly the frontline. We are unraveling the ecosystems that make dinner. And it's not just dams anymore. It's the biggest of all of the challenges to the future of our food systems, including our seafood, is climate change and ocean acidification and those sort of welter of other symptoms that come with a world where we emit, on the order of 40, 50 billion tons of greenhouse gases a year. Probably the largest waste stream in human history. We've banked in the atmosphere trillions of tons that even if we were to stop emissions completely today, would still drive warming that pushes the wheels right off the bus and other consequences with it. So that became, over time, the center of our work, focusing on what can we and the folks we work with, our job is to help them become champions for the resource they depend on. The fishermen, the tribes, and many already are. I see in the room, we have Jeremy Brown, we have Kevin Scribner. Kevin is our board chair. Jeremy's put in some real time looking after the resource in profound and beautiful ways. Many others have too. We don't make people into champions. We help do it. The same is true with tribes. So that's where this came from. I'm one of the thousands and thousands of people who have that particular story around one big river that got whacked and took out of that what became a lifelong commitment. And this organization grew out of that.
When you say got whacked, tell me more about that.
Well, I think the destruction of the Columbia River salmon runs is one of the great tragedies of environmental history. You can trace this back to early development of irrigation when they began diking and sealing off spawning grounds, and then it kept going. And right up through the mid-century, the mid-20th century, there were more dams going in as late as the 70s, and big ones. And that meant, in some cases, sealing off hundreds of miles of spawning and rearing habitat, losing entire races of fish that will never come back. They're gone. And in the world that we lost there, and we've piled up so many other insults. The dams were certainly what my grandparents knew and identified as the villain in their story. And I agree, but they were never the only one. And we now have even larger insults that are undercutting the ability of the waters we depend on to keep making dinner for billions of people around the world, livelihoods for hundreds of millions, if you take the FAO's data. And this is a series of blows to the ability of the waters to make dinner that have already become visible. They were visible when I was a child. And when you look at the rise of climate in that sort of cluster of woes coming toward us, it's gone from what seemed like a small and distant figure on the horizon to an enormous one. A year ago, a little over a year ago, we lost both of the Bering Sea's big crab fisheries. Whether they are back, who knows? Going back over the last few decades, we've had glaciers vanishing from the mountains that feed the rivers that make the salmon. No water, no salmon.
No.
You look at the Quinault River, for example. It made in its prime over 1 million fish a year. It's down to a few percent of that now, if that. It's really a few thousand fish, and that's a story rooted in the demise of the glaciers. We're unraveling these ecosystems, their ability to deliver the water these fish need to rear clean, cool water to grow up in.
Right.
A system that doesn't wash them out to sea when they're still eggs. It's
Right.
destabilized the hydrologic cycle and now floods like crazy when they need stable, safe waters to rear in. And it turns to drought in the summer and parches and bakes them in their, parboils them in
Right.
the river. A few years ago, I think it was 2021, we lost about half the returning adult sockeye salmon coming back to the Columbia River. The same occurred essentially on the Fraser, one of the other great continental salmon producing rivers. These are heat effects at that point, just heat. It's actually a direct effect. Most effects of climate change are indirect, involving
Right.
induced growth of toxic algae that kill things, including fish.
Right.
Klamath. In that same heat spell, the Klamath suffered a 95% loss of the young of the year Chinook salmon in the fall run, which had been rebuilding beautifully. They'd done all this work, removing dams and restoring habitat, putting the ecosystem back together, looking after the forests and the watershed the way they needed to. Enormous investment for generations, decades of people working on that. And it was the curve on that return was good. They were bringing back the fish. I remember in 2018 seeing 500,000 fish return to that river. It's colossal achievement, but scuttled in the demise of one year class. Hopefully the others will survive better, but that's going to put a crimp on salmon fishing off the coast for a while, and it's happening in every river system. You look at the USGS data sets that show how hot the rivers are.
Uh-huh.
And the entire west of the United States is full of rivers colored red on their map.
Right.
Yeah. And, that's just the thermal effects. And then you look at the toxic algae that like that heat, and they like the hypoxia that comes with it. They like the nutrient imbalance that comes from our coastal runoff. They thrive in acidified waters. There are some very fast knife blades emerging out of the water in the form of the microbiome changing. And all of these things add up to a set of consequences that are coming home to roost now and extinguishing fisheries and threatening those that remain. And our ability to sustain this depends not just on adapting, which we have to do, but also on getting to the root cause, because it's pushing the system to the point there is no adaptation. You can't adapt. If you're a fisherman, you can't adapt to an ocean big dinner. So that's the center of our plate. We deal with other issues, but that's central. The big challenge to the ocean, and in that domain, tribes again are just tremendous leaders. So we continue to learn enormously from them.
Well, let's bookmark that for a second and just come back to the work that Global Ocean Health does. Tell me a little bit about the genesis of the organization, and then I really want to dig into the work that you all are doing with the tribal communities.
Sure. Yeah. Well, this grew. My interest in looking after the habitat led me to work with fishermen and for fishermen, writing about what was happening to the resource. That led me to write when I was a kid reporter for National Fisherman magazine.
Right.
By the early mid-90s, I had gone away and done a few other things and come back, and the owners of the magazine were looking at a whole raft of conservation problems besetting the industry. And they and the editors turned to me and said, "Is there anything we can do about this?"
Mm-hmm.
Sure, we can start an organization and go after it. Why don't you guys throw a little seed funding in the pot? I'll go raise the rest, and we'll put together a board of experts and skilled problem solvers, and we'll go after it. And they threw in, and so did some foundations, so did NOAA. And But that was the birth of what became the National Fisheries Conservation Center, which is the name we operated under for many years. And we built in the 90s, starting in the 2000s, about a decade later, we built a program called Global Ocean Health. And it came from what people know us for, how they identify us. And we just said, that's what we're doing. We still do work that's fundamentally around fisheries, and I'm proud and happy to do it. But the core of our work is not around making sure the fisheries don't break the ocean. That's actually a problem that we know a lot about. People have known a lot about that for a long time. It's not all that mysterious. It's hard, but it's not utterly novel. We were up against new and bigger problems that needed real focus. And most of the time, people weren't looking at them in those days. Some of the problems were terms people had a hard time pronouncing. There weren't philanthropies dealing with them yet. You had things emerging out of the science, like ocean acidification.
Right.
A handful of researchers who could talk about it mostly to each other because they barely spoke English. They spoke in chemistry. So we took on a piece of what is sort of central to our axioms throughout time from the origins of this thing. Let's translate the unpronounceable and mysterious into plain English so regular people can use it. Let's go to the edge of the horizon, where the new findings are coming from, both threats and opportunities that people in the community need to know about. And by the community, I mean fishermen, tribes, resource managers. Sometimes they are the same people, and coastal communities. These folks have everything at stake, and they need to know what's coming over the horizon. So we do this work. It's been central to our work for a long time, and we also do what I think of as field building work. Once you've scouted things out and brought it back to the community, and they said, "Yeah, we better deal with this," which they tend to do. Then you got to build the capacity to actually deal with it. That means building up the capacity for science, building up the capacity in the industry to get an oar in and make a difference.
Uh-huh.
And we often have said to fishermen, it's not your tailpipe that matters, it's your mouth. What you do with your mouth is your real power. Your voice is far more capable of contributing to solutions than what you do with your tailpipe. You add up all your tailpipes, the entire fishing industry, and it's maybe 2%, 3% of the total emissions in the world. It ain't a lot. So the highest estimate I've seen is around 6%. But when fishermen come to Congress and say, our ability to make dinner and put it on the plate is at risk, and you guys have to make policies to clean up the pollution that's undercutting this, that is a very powerful voice.
For sure.
It's much more powerful than that tailpipe. So it's not that the tailpipe doesn't matter. All tailpipes do. But you really got to do both. And it's the ability to bear witness that is the incredible superpower of this industry as it goes forward. Not just this industry, this way of life. People who depend on a healthy ocean to make a living and to bring food to the world.
Right. So that's the crux of it then, is that it's the fishermen are the ones that should be drawing attention, that can be drawing attention, and that you're helping draw attention to this ongoing problem. Or I don't even want to use the word emerging, because we've known about it for a long time. We've just failed to respond to it. And so what I want to talk a little bit about, because you and I talked about this when we've chatted in the past, is there's a connection to the ways to deal with these. It's a flat out pollution problem that comes from the tribal communities. And that's an area where you guys have started to really put some energy into. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we've done a lot of work with tribes for a long time. And by the 2000s, it was a really major part of what we do. In what now, 2011, um, a moment occurred when I could see that it was possible to rope in states and get them uh, tackling the problem of ocean acidification in a way they had not. We had a chance to spur that by starting in Washington, a thing called the Blue Ribbon Panel on Ocean Acidification in Washington State. The governor appointed it. I wrote about a 2-page memo, and a very well-known tribal thought leader named Terry Williams I helped develop that and co-signed it along with a shellfish grower, Bill Dewey from Taylor Shellfish, and one of the leading scientists studying ocean acidification, Terry Klinger at the University of Washington. And we brought it, actually, Terry and Bill brought it to the governor. And within about a week, she was on it. And they were calling up and saying, we want to appoint people. Who should we get to do this? And it opened up an era of much more intensive work with tribes. Terry became a key part of our whole effort, and his tribe, Chilalip, became an engine of a lot of the collaborative work that we've done in the country and beyond. Terry was he died last summer. One of the great 360 minds that I've ever known, just a marvelous mind. And he really devoted his career to the work of restoring and protecting the salmon and the ocean and the watersheds. And it led to things that for us were surprising and I think really true. He taught us to work where the problem comes from. And for example, almost all of our pollution comes from the land.
Right.
You gotta meet pollution where it comes from, and that means working with and engaging the source of the pollution, the people who are living and working along the shore and up the rivers, and giving them a way to become the solution. And Terry was a master of this, building out of what were often very tense, conflicted relationships, models of collaborative problem solving that we found inspiring and useful and still do. An example of that, the tribe spent decades fighting with dairy farmers and suing them in court over the cow poop that washed into the Snohomish River and washed down the river and fouled it and damaged their fishing grounds and their shellfish resources. And with the dairy farmers, they were undergoing just a colossal series of challenges themselves. They were going out of business hand over fist. You can start the clock back in the 60s and 70s. There were 250 of them in that river basin, in the Snohomish Basin. Today, there might be a half dozen left. It's just a very tough business and they were getting crushed.
Right.
So you could win in court and say, you have to comply, and they had no means to do it.
Right.
Finally, the tribe made a deal with them, said, how about we help you become the solution? We'll build and jointly operate with you a dairy biogas digester that will capture the cow poop from some of your biggest dairy operations. And then it won't run off into the creeks and come down into the river. And now they're going even further. They've become a really conspicuous leader in the field. It's often the case. They often are leaders. They not only have they built this collaborative problem-solving engine with the farm community that they used to fight with, they've become the most trusted leaders in the valley. The farmers look to them for leadership, not to the mayors and county officials, but to the tribe. And they're now installing, it's supposed to go in this summer, a device that will pyrolyze the biogas that's produced from this thing,
Right.
turn it into and extract from it hydrogen and carbon in the form of a dry powder that falls in a bucket at the bottom of the machine. So what you do then is you back the lens up. What this system becomes is not just a biogas digester. It does something that's now a little bit old hat. It wasn't when they did it. It also becomes a system that uses grass growing in the pasture to capture photosynthetically, to capture carbon. That carbon moves through the system, becomes poop. The poop goes in the digester. You wind up getting methane and carbon dioxide out of that. You extract the carbon and you extract the hydrogen. You have two very valuable renewable ingredients for use. The carbon, for example, perhaps in making carbon fiber and other materials. That's to be seen. They're hoping to reuse it in that kind of way. And the hydrogen is a renewable fuel. When you burn it, it releases water. It's kind of a circular economy.
Okay.
Solving for carbon emissions and global greenhouse gases the same way that you would expect from people who are big on a circular economy. It's baked into the values of many tribes. Rather than a wasteful linear economy where we buy stuff, use it up, and throw it out.
Throw it out, right. So tell me about the tribal leadership in carbon renewal initiative that you guys have got going.
That grew out of a report from the UN Climate Science Agency, the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change.
Right.
In 2018, IPCC put out a report that said, we got to cap warming at 1.5 degrees or we're toast. And that was the headline most of the media went with. And Terry Williams and I read that, and we said, the real news here is what comes right after that headline. Because what they say here is that to do it, you've got to now start cleaning up the massive amount of carbon dioxide we've already put in the atmosphere and other greenhouse gases. We missed our shot at solving this problem merely by making less mess.
Right.
That too, it's still the best and cheapest way to solve this problem. Nothing stops that. It has to happen. But we've done a terrible job of it. We've done a terrible job for so long. We flat missed our shot at fixing this problem by doing the things we all thought were the only thing to do.
Right.
Reduce emissions.
Reduce emissions, right.
That's no longer enough. It's necessary, but no longer sufficient. Now, what's needed is a massive new burst of activity, much of which will be big industrial activity that scales essentially to the size of the fossil fuel industry to clean up the mess that the fossil fuel industry makes. We all burn those fuels. And collectively, we're emitting billions and billions of tons, tens of billions of tons a year. That's because of the math on how carbon dioxide is made. You burn fuel and you make carbon dioxide out of it. It has a mass of about 3.7 times the carbon in the fuel. So you actually make more mess than the stuff you make it with.
So help me with that. Okay, walk me back through that.
Yeah.
Are you saying that so we extract fossil fuel and then when we use it, we create 3 times as much problem with that fuel? Am I following that right?
That's right. It's closer to 3.7 times.
All right, almost 4.
If you take a gallon of gas or diesel and you burn it, you're going to make 21 or 22 pounds of carbon dioxide. That gallon is only going to weigh about 6 or 7 pounds.
Right.
So your multiplier is steep there.
Got it. Okay.
A small amount of fuel does an awful lot of work and makes a very large mess.
Makes a large mess. Got it. And we are not doing things to reduce the amount of mess we're creating, right?
Well, we are, but we're not doing enough.
All right, we're not doing enough. Fair enough. We're not doing enough to reduce the amount of mess we're making. But I'm are we doing anything about cleaning up the mess?
Indeed, we are.
Okay.
That report from IPCC sent a message to Terry and I, and we began taking it to tribes, saying, this is the cusp of a new wave of industrial development that will have to scale very fast and very large. And we know the history of those. We know it has not been good for Indian country. It's a dour history. It hasn't been good for many people, nor for nature. And we can't afford to repeat that here, because if it work, it has to be built to last. It can't be built like a mining town that you build, you extract, you finish, you let it rust into the landscape. In a few years.
Right.
We're looking at an activity that's going to have to continue for centuries. We're going to have to build institutions that are accountable to the public, that are accountable to the environment, that can earn their place, and it's an enormous place in the future of our society and our planet. We're talking about tackling the central waste stream of our civilization and capturing it and pulling it out of the air and either putting it away for keeps in the ground or building things out of it.
Okay.
The message for tribes, and actually for other communities too, is this is coming, and it's coming fast. The slope of investment in the field has just taken off. It's gone from a few $1 million a year into billions and billions of dollars, both public and private money. And it's a question for folks who are going to be on the front line of these solutions. And that includes fishing communities and tribes and others who depend on the ocean and the rivers. Do you want to get out front of this and shape it? Or do you want to wait for it to land on your lap in the form of developers who say, just sign here? How would you like this to go? You still have time, not much. If you want to get out in front of it and shape it so that you can live with it, it's time. And for Terry, the option to just say no did not make sense. It was clearly we're looking at a force that's not going to be easily stopped. It probably won't be stopped. You can argue about whether it's a good idea or not. It's a perfectly legitimate argument that we don't know what we're doing and we ought to be cautious about that. That's certainly true.
Right.
Never cleaned up a mess on this scale before. It's not certain that we know how to do it. It is certain that if we don't do it well, we will make new messes, and those will be, have multiple consequences.
Sure.
There are many reasons for caution, but saying no is simply the equivalent of denial. It is happening, and the real question is, how do you want it to go? And it's at this point you have people harvesting billions of dollars from the federal government, thanks to the 3 big climate laws that passed, and billions more in private investment, and building systems that are designed to capture millions of tons of carbon from the atmosphere, and either put it in a hole in the ground and hopefully make it turn into rock down there, or turn it into other things. They're pursuing this in multiple channels. Some are nature-based using photosynthesis. Some are rooted in geologic processes where you have natural weathering that absorbs CO2, and they find ways to harness that. That's also a natural process. Some are really intensely industrial engineered approaches, and there are some approaches that are coming together that are really hybrids. A hybrid approach, an example of that is what's now being done at the biogas digester I told you about, that the tribe has.
Sure.
At the front end, you've got nature doing the capture, and then you've got engineering rendering the product into something that you can count, measure, validate, and get paid for in a credit market maybe one day, or turn it into new products.
Right.
One First Nation in Canada that we have been looking at and talking with, they're an early actor in the field. They're doing a very bold thing. It's the Upper Nicola Indian tribe, or rather, Indian band, uh, up in the Okanagan. They endured truly biblical climate consequences in 2021. They had a heat dome, we all did, here in the Pacific Northwest. It killed about 200 people in the US. It killed about 700 in the interior of British Columbia.
Wow.
A lot of that was right around where they are, in a deep interior. And then in the fall, you had atmospheric rivers, which had been amplified by climate change. And the rivers brought flooding, the atmospheric rivers brought flooding. And the town where they all do their grocery shopping and go to the doctor, and some of them live, was epic newsmaking all around the world. Just a horrendous flooding, washing out roads and parts of town and kinds of things. And they looked at each other at the end of that, and they said, "We got to do more than change the light bulbs."
Right.
This is a little more than driving into town one less time a week. We got to get real here. And they turned out to be able to. Not everyone could do this, but they were in a position. They had a gobsmacking amount of power from 3 hydroelectric power dams coming together at a substation, a big industrial substation on their land. They'd had misgivings about that project for many years. And suddenly they looked at it and said, maybe this is an asset. Maybe we can use it. And they did. And they made a deal with a company called Carbon Engineering, which does a system of direct air capture. It's a very industrial process, very highly engineered. Their system was developed at Harvard. It's thoroughly validated. It's not a con job.
Right.
It does use a lot of energy, and that's a limiting factor in a big way. They happen to have a lot of renewable energy, zero carbon, so they could use it. And they made a deal. What they're going to do, they're in the process now of putting this together. They're going to capture that carbon. They're going to capture hydrogen out of water. They have apparently plentiful water. And they're going to put the two together and make their own renewable synthetic diesel and other fuels, if I understand right, and sell it. In British Columbia, in Washington, Oregon, and California too, all of these places have clean fuel standards on the books. So that's your asset. If you make clean fuel and sell it into that market, the policy is like a ratchet. You've just displaced dirty fossil fuel from the market.
There you go.
So it's not a throw more fuel on the fire option, which, if you did it in Ohio, that's all you'd be doing.
Right.
More fuel, throw it on the fire. You do that in a place that's got a clean fuel standard, you're taking a bite out of the the fortress market of the liquid fossil fuel industry, which is transportation fuels.
Right.
That's their production is expected to be around 100 million liters a year. That makes it one of the larger projects in North America. And they are, 3.5, 4 hours out of Vancouver, big urban market to sell into.
Sure.
It'll allow them, if it works as hoped, and this is new, to build an adaptive solution to some of the climate problem that meaningfully attacks the emissions that are the root of it, and generates some local economic activity the tribe will benefit from, the First Nation. They don't use the word tribe.
Right.
It's very unusual from what we've seen so far among tribes and First Nation in that they really chose a highly engineered industrial approach, but they used what they had, and we'll see where it lands. It's not that they're not interested in nature-based solutions. They're also doing things. They're building solar and they're doing a lot of other things. Like many tribes and First Nations, they're involved in lots of restoration activity, ecosystem restoration work. It's just they had this opportunity and they took it. It's another example of a very circular approach to solutions.
Mhm.
Taking the carbon and putting it in a hole in the ground, literally in a well, and sealing it, which is what much of the fossil fuel industry is interested in doing. They're saying, no, we're gonna make something out of it. That reuse value is at work.
So how did you guys get to the tribal communities? What drew you to that community to try to address this?
In the very beginning, tribes were simply the best in the game at what it took to put Humpty Dumpty back together in salmon country.
Tell me more about that. How do you mean?
40 years ago, when Billy Frank started opening doors for me, it was because he could see that this is where I wanted to go, and I could be helpful to tribes in some ways, as I was doing the same kind of work with fishing communities,
right,
and fishing communities too. They just said, let's help this kid, and really, I was a kid, so I got introduced to leaders all over the Northwest in Indian country, and became someone they would take a phone call from. They were and are just the most committed, never say quit actors in the space of restoring busted ecosystems to make sure the salmon can still run. And when the going gets tough, and it gets tough a lot, restoration is work. It's Humpty Dumpty, reassembly. It's
for sure.
People quit in droves. They go get a job for Microsoft. They have lots of options. They're members of a mobile society.
Mhm.
Tribes, they're place-based, and their commitment is not negotiable. When the going gets tough, they just buckle down. And that's the difference between the best in the game and everybody else. It's not that everybody else isn't committed too, but they're committed. They really got nothing else to do. I mean, they're locked by law under treaties and under the establishment of reservations under federal law. They're locked into where they live, lose their place that makes their food and their homes. They got nowhere to go. The rest of us can all say, well, I could always move to BC. And it ain't them. That's not their reality. It means that they stand and deliver when the going gets tough. And it's inspiring and profound and sometimes heartbreaking. So we work with them because that commitment is unbreakable. And it is the other thing that they have going for them is that having one recognition of their treaty rights over decades of lobbying and activism and lawsuits and all that. Particularly the Northwest tribes, so this is true in various ways across indigenous communities worldwide. They've been winning recognition of their either treaty rights or other indigenous rights, including the authority to manage and conserve resources. They implicit in that is that they are not just people who use a resource. They're not just a user group. They are governments. You don't have to treaty with an entity that's not a government, and that gives them authorities that weren't given them by the deals they cut to secure that authority in the end. Those were inherent. Those were recognized when the colonists and the armies went around and negotiated at gunpoint with them and cut those treaties. They brought that to the party before any of us were here, and that ancient heritage of indigenous management of resources goes back really into the deeps of time, and when they make decisions of high environmental importance or ethical importance, leaders in Indian country that we've seen tend to invoke not just 7 generations, some do, but often an uncountable number of generations going back into the past, invoking the ancestors to whom they owe their very best to make sure that they live up to all the gifts and sacrifice that their ancestors undertook. And going forward into the future, an uncountable number of generations into the future, to the descendants to whom they, and frankly we, owe a a very, very committed response to the mess we're making.
Well, and I think, we're going to wrap up here, but I think that's the essence of it, Brad, is that it seems to me like we have neglected probably one of the better sources of knowledge and commitment over the years to trying to deal with this problem, and we've got a almost unfathomable problem in front of us. And I applaud you guys for going to that community to look for solutions, to look for wisdom, to look for commitment. Is that fair to say, to try to deal with a problem that really, if we're crazy not to be dealing with?
Yeah, I think that is fair. I mean, they've been building governments for a long time. They taught Jefferson how to design federalism.
Right.
One of the reasons that they were good at that is that they don't have a unified, simple kind of Shangri-La indigenous world. They have a real world in which there are disagreements, and people have to work through their disagreements and get things that matter done. Federalism is all about that. It got built into the U.S. Constitution because Jefferson and his colleagues learned it from the Iroquois.
Mm-hmm.
It's an example of something that they have to offer that actually goes not just into stewardship of the natural world, it's also problem solving here in the human world. When I look at what Terry did in his lifetime, building bridges and alliances across really conflicted divides with other communities, and not just with farmers, many others too, I see a model of the kind of leadership we desperately need. Climate change is not happening in an incoherent way. It is utterly coherent. It is nature responding to a force we've unleashed on the world in a completely coherent way. We are the ones who are not coherent. And we're the ones whose mess is as much our inability to work out conflicts with each other as it is the physical mess we make in the world. And our ability to deal with the physical realities of climate change will depend on learning how to work with each other as much as it depends on how to understand the physical systems we're altering.
Well, I think what you have told us is that we would be well advised to look to our indigenous communities for wisdom in this area. I don't. I wish I could say, well, there's a happy ending to this story, but there really isn't. I mean, it's going to be a tough problem that is only going to get worse if we continue to ignore it. And I applaud you guys for making the efforts to bring the attention to the work that can be done with the tribal communities or the indigenous communities.
Thank you. If we're successful, I think they're very well positioned to kind of cut an edge for how communities on the front line can meet this time and shape the response so that we can live with it. It's not only the problem that we have to manage, it's our own response.
Mm-hmm.
So that we can live with the solutions we create. The solutions are capable of harm too.
For sure.
And if tribes lead in this space as they have in others, we think that they will help to carve out really blaze a trail that others will want to walk in some ways too. And whereas the rest of the working waterfront and frankly the farming world as well is fractionalized and consists of people who typically don't have the power of government. There's a few exceptions. Tribes do.
Mm-hmm.
They've been able to amass considerable experience in governing and considerable expertise on a number of the technical issues there's more to be done, but they have a long march ahead of many of the other communities at the front line. It means they're well positioned to help kind of cut the trail, and I think they're going to wind up doing it one way or another. But our work with them is designed to help them get ahead of an utterly new set of climate solutions that are that really none of us anticipated. We all thought that we'd be able to deal with this through emission reduction alone.
Right.
We were wrong. And we're now stuck with having to learn how to clean up a mess we shouldn't have made in the first place. It's expensive. It's going to be messy. It's not going to be a clean shot. We missed the clean shot.
Yeah.
Now we're going to need the guidance of people who know something about working in a messy world and making the best of it.
Well, hopefully we will be smart enough, wise enough, prudent enough to learn from them about this. People want to learn more about the work you do. Where should they head?
I'll give you two websites. The organization website is globaloceanhealth.org. And the program website is called buildingtriballeadership.org. And that's our largest program right now.
Awesome. Well, Brad, thank you. You and I have been talking a couple of times before we got on here, and I really appreciate the work you're doing. I continue to hope that we can amplify that work. I hope our leaders find wisdom where they can and take the actions they need to take. And we here at the network will try to do what we can to send that message out where we can hopefully get some action on it. So
thank you, Tom. I much appreciate the work you've been doing with the network for all these years. And really, we are, whether we know it or not, we don't always, we are really all in the same boat.
For sure.
So we're going to need to act like it. So I look forward to working with you on that.
Well, and I look forward to having you back on at some point where we can talk more about maybe some good news in the future, but at least an update on the work that's getting done. So thank you. We'll wrap up there. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this with us. And our next Waterside Chat is in the works. You'll get people who have signed up for our emails will get that information through the emails. And as we get to the end of the hour, I'm going to say thank you again. And that's it for today.
Thank you, Tom.
You're welcome, Brad. Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode of Waterside Chat, share it with your friends and colleagues. You can check us out on YouTube or most podcast services. To stay up to date on Waterside Chats and the Marine Fish Conservation Network, sign up for emails at conservefish.org. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you at the next Waterside Chat.